Now, I am extremely happy that we now have the second installment of our conversations on what has been going on for the past 6 months in Iran, the movement that we now refer to as Woman, Life, and Freedom. Our last month event was in Persian, and this event is in English, and of course, our speakers and panelists are not the same. Today we have Mehrzad Boroujerdi, Nahid Siamdoust, and Fatemeh Shams, and all three of our speakers have been very much involved, both in media and in academic settings, discussing the events and particularly the new movements. And so this is a time after 6 months to both reflect and also to engage in a discussion about the movement. I will introduce very briefly our speakers, but their full biographies will be posted on Zoom, and you can see their full biographies. After I introduce our speakers, I just pose a few questions to them, but I am hoping that most of the conversation would be a dialogue among our three speakers, and perhaps I can also say a few words if we have time. I would like to ask the audience to please write your questions in the chat room. We will monitor the chat room, and after our first round of discussions, we will read and raise your questions with the speakers, and hopefully there will be about 20 minutes time for the question and answer section of this discussion. If the questions are not too many and we have time, I would be happy to just open the room to our audience to ask their questions directly, but we will see what happens and how many questions we have. Okay, again, let me thank our three wonderful speakers. Thank you so much for accepting our invitations and being here. And I, as well as I am sure all of us, look forward to hearing your thoughts and the conversation. Mehrzad Boroujerdi is the Vice Provost and Dean of the College of Art, Science, and Education at Missouri University of Science and Technology. Professor Boroujerdi is author or co-author of several books, including Post-Revolutionary Iran, a political handbook. This book was published in 2018. He's also author of The Mirror for the Muslim Prince, a political handbook published in 2013. He's also the author of Intellectuals and the West. This book was published in 1996. We also have Professor Fatemeh Shams, Assistant Professor of Persian Literature at University of Pennsylvania. Professor Shams received her PhD from University of Oxford, and her recent book, A Revolution in Writing, was also published by Oxford University. Our third speaker is Nahid Siamdoust, also a graduate of Oxford University and currently an assistant professor of Middle Eastern Studies at University of Texas at Austin. Professor Siamdoust is author of The Soundtrack of Revolution. This book was published by Stanford University in 2017. I have to say that our speakers are all very accomplished scholars and public intellectuals, and particularly they have written extensively on various newspapers and magazines as public intellectuals, and are regular, they have regular presence in the media. We don't have time for me to list their accomplishments, but as I said, they are being posted on Zoom, and you can see, and I'm sure that most of you know them. Okay. I would like to raise a question to all three of you, our speakers. Have you reflect on what has been going on in the past 6, almost 7 months, basically since early fall, and tell us and share with us your thoughts on the movement of woman, freedom, and life and freedom, and tell us what is your thinking. Of course, this would be a brief set of comments. I know it's difficult. This movement is a very important, critical, and in some respect, multidimensional movement. But just share with us your thoughts, and let's start with you, Mehrzad. I introduce you first, then we go with Fatemeh and Nahid at the end. Take 5 to 7 minutes and share your thoughts with us.
Sure. Thank you, Alidon, for the introduction, for giving us this opportunity to you and your colleagues at NYU. I'm delighted to be here with you. Yes, so I wanted to share some introductory remarks regarding the Women, Life, and Freedom movement, and then we can go into the details about the second part of the discussion, which is really about its reception on the part of the academic world in the Western world. So as a student of Iranian politics, when I look at the events that transpired in September of 2022, I would call it perhaps the most serious challenge to the Islamic Republic over the last 4 decades. There are 2 instances that one can think of that really gave the Islamic Republic a serious a challenge. One perhaps was the Green Movement of 2009, which was a bit more modest in terms of its demands, and yet it took longer, perhaps in terms of sheer participation. Even more people participated in that one in 2009 that we saw in 2022-23, the current movement. But the Green Movement had a specific demand, which of course was a bit limited about dealing with the result of a presidential election where people thought there was massive vote rigging. This time around, however, this movement went way beyond just asking for a course correction, and we saw basically challenges to the entire system. I would describe it perhaps as a political heart attack for the Islamic Republic, one that was not fatal and did not bring the regime to its knees, but I think, perhaps one that we can think of as a dress rehearsal for what might come next. That's how I look at the events of 2022. I would say that what we witnessed were quite unique in historical terms, meaning that we saw a qualitative step forward toward regime change. We saw the radicalization of demands, and we saw the sort of the delegitimization of the Islamic Republic on a massive scale. I think it is fair to say that this movement broke many taboos, right? And it enabled us as the observers or the people in the streets of Iran as participants to envision a new vistas. I want to highlight two characteristics of this movement that I really caught my attention. One was the amazing creativity that we saw in terms of the artistic forms that this uprising took, the slogans, the forms of a struggle that we witnessed over the course of the last 6 months, which was quite creative. And I guess, shouldn't be surprising considering that most of the crowd taking part in it were, younger type Iranians, and therefore a highly educated, urban and technologically savvy population is capable of this type of means and modes of a struggle. The second one that, was of course obvious to everyone around the world was the prominence of women and youth fighting what I describe is perhaps the most anti-woman regime in Iranian history. When we talk about Iranian politics, we are talking about a male-dominated politics. Those of you who know some of my recent research, for example, about political elite, know that my empirical study of over 2,500 politicians in post-revolutionary Iran basically reveals that only 3% of them have been female, and the rest are male. So to see women play those roles, I think, was quite remarkable. However, we are not here just to praise this movement and its accomplishment. As a social scientist, I am interested in something else that perhaps many of us have been a bit reluctant to talk about, and that is its shortcomings. I want to raise the issue of what I call the curse of episodic uprisings in Iran that, like the ones we saw, in 1999, in 2009, 2017, 2019, and then 2022, 23, and ask this question: why these episodic uprisings subside so quickly? Why the short durability, right? I think, and I have a lot more to say about this, but in the interest of time, I want to sort of limit my comments now, and then entertain those comments in greater depth in the subsequent discussions. But my worry is that we have not been capable of really staging a successful revolution. I hesitate to use the word revolution to describe what happened in Iran. I think, for my standards of what I consider to be the criteria for a social movement, bringing down a regime, etc., it didn't rise to that level. It was absolutely an uprising, no question about it. But it had, its set of shortcomings in a country of over 80 million. To have, some hundreds of thousands of young people, demonstrate in a movement that did not necessarily benefit from, identified leadership. It was sort of a horizontal type of a movement. I think, in a way, perhaps many of us who were expecting a better outcome underestimated the capability of the regime to survive and live through this crisis, just like it has done in the past. And so I think the responsibility now falls on the shoulders of many of us in the academic community to really, instead of engaging in what I call sloganeering, right, to really put on our thinking hats and analyze what happened and how we can go further from here.
Thank you, Mehrzad. It's interesting that you highlight more of the movement in terms of being episodic, not being able to transform into a mass movement. And you didn't mention what seems to be very inspiring symbol of the movement, and that is a woman, life freedom. I will come back to both of these issues, hopefully, as we further discuss the movement. But I now want to turn to Fatemeh. I want you to also reflect and share your thoughts, but also perhaps, if possible, to reflect on how Mehrzad just concluded her comments, which I believe to be a big very much underestimated issue by analysts, and that is that the ability of the government to resist and to suppress. After all, after about 4 or 5 months of national resistance, although it wasn't a mass movement, but it was a national network of resistance and very creative. The state remained more or less intact. The floor is yours now, Fatemeh.
Thank you, Alijan. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here in conversation with you and Mehrzad Aziz and Nahid Aziz, who is my long life comrade since Oxford times. So yeah, I mean, if you allow me, since Mehrzad, reflected on the nature of what is unique about this uprising or movement or revolution, and I will reflect on what I call it as well. I think one thing that is really important is that and make this this event, set of events quite unique is. It's the erased identities and bodies taking the center stage. And I think that just manifests in the body and identity of Jina Mahsa Amini. And the most important aspect of that is the erosion of her first name. She's known as Mahsa Amini, but really her first name is Jina. And the reason that we don't know that name is because most of the Kurds don't have the permission to actually register their Kurdish names in Iran. So, and I think that's a metaphor. I'm into literatures and I love metaphors, and I think her name is just a metaphor for what happened over the past 6 months that makes this, in my opinion, the last throw in the sort of the life of the Islamic Republic. I very much consider woman life freedom as the very last stage of Islamic Republic's sort of lifetime. And I consider it also as a revolution that is very much in the process of becoming. I don't use the past tense in order to reflect on it. And I don't think that we are here to think about it as a set of events that happened and it's finished and the government has remained intact, and it's sort of an event of the past, and now we are here to actually reflect on that. I think we are very much in the middle of it still, and we don't know what happens in a couple of months. I see these bodies of these women and girls who came and stood up on the cars as a volcano that erupted, and the Islamic Republic responded with rape, responded with sexual assault, with prison, with forced confessions. You might consider that as or describe it as iron fist. I will consider it as how terrified the government really was of these women, and showing this terrorizing response, in fact, is an act of desperation. I think we can't and we should not see this in and analyze what happened in Iran in vacuum. I think the international community is playing a very, very important role at the moment in helping this government survive. All the behind the scenes talks and conversations that are happening as we speak about the nuclear deal, about the exchange of political prisoners, these are important, and this is not just the shortcomings of the movement, and is not just to be blamed on those bodies who literally put themselves on the line in order to reclaim dignity and basic human rights. It's a little bit unfair, I think, to kind of expect those to bring down a regime on their own. We all know that this regime is heavily militant. We know that the West has been dealing with this government, selling them arms, helping them smuggling arms. And it's not really just, the Islamic Republic fighting these people by themselves. And so that's something to consider, I think. Another important factor, I think it's the feminist aspect and the sort of the spirit of this revolutionary uprising. Or at this point, I really think it's a revolutionary movement that at any point could succeed. Although it's not a revolutionary stage yet, in the sense that the government is about to, kind of collapse. But the outpouring of, as Mehrzad mentioned, the outpouring of poetry, literature, artwork, songs, music, it's just unbelievable. Comparing to 2009, and the Green Movement, this is just by far the most creative, episode of resistance, and I think that's really important to consider. And also the feminist aspect of it, which makes this a truly intersectional movement. It's really not just about women. It's not just about Kurdish women. It's about queer bodies. It's about marginalized bodies and identities. And I think we see that, the part of the reason, in my opinion, that other countries have come forward the way that they have and showed empathy is because how humanistic it is to just, to be able to relate. It's no longer just a domestic issue of a country or an internal affairs of a country. It's about, these bodies who are just seeking basic rights and respect. So yeah, I think those are the important things. And I just wanted to also, if there was time later, I would like to also mention why this particular event, meaning the state murder of Mahsa Amini, became sort of a turning point. I think we can't again see that in a vacuum and just think because there was a Kurdish woman, because thousands of women have been thrown into those horrible vans and, sexually assaulted over the past decade. Why this particular case? I think since 2017, what happened with the crisis with gasoline in Iran, with bread, and then the collapse of the towers in Khuzestan, I think that, the mass killings of the protesters that in Khuzestan and in Nizar in particular, those are really important events that I think we need to keep into account in order to have a better understanding of why this is very much the last episode of how Islamic Republic could suppress. I think what is important here is also what my concern is, since Mehrzad also mentioned the shortcomings. I really agree with him that this is the time to also not just praise, but also, problematize and think about, the shortcomings. I'm personally really concerned about this movement being hijacked, mostly by the forces in diaspora, and also helping the Islamic Republic to kind of further, reassert itself as a result of these divisions in diaspora. And I think, academia can perhaps play a really important role in becoming more involved in, in making sort of content making at this point. Okay, I'll stop there. Sorry, I talked a lot.
Thank you so much, Fatemeh Jan. You call this movement a revolutionary movement, and you remind us or want us to continue imagining it as an ongoing movement. I appreciate both of those comments, but you also focused on sort of imageries of the revolution, which obviously is both critical and important, and probably we need to work more on this because, and I connect this with revolutions because it is always during revolutionary situations where people are able to project their creativity. So I very much appreciate this and see if we have time to continue this conversation along these lines. But you also point to foreign forces. I imagine this is reference to Europeans and Americans, say in the past few weeks, some rumors or discussions of perhaps some kind of approachment to the Islamic Republic. The question here is, in the context of your thinking that this is a continuing revolution, is that most of what you seems to see as foreign, indirect at least, support for the regime comes when there is at least understanding by, say, media outside of Iran that the protest movement has been quiet or has been managed or has been suppressed. So this is something to come back to, that the point I'm trying to make is that there is always a relationship between how a revolutionary movement is perceived outside of a particular country, right? When the movement was in its full-fledged, perhaps highest form of its power, it was condemned by even governments who were somehow friendly with the Islamic Republic, but now everybody is re-evaluating their relationship. Thank you so much. Nahi Jan, you are our last speaker in this round. And of course, you can, if you want, you can reflect on some of these important ideas raised by our two speakers. But you are perhaps more than any of us involved with, what we call foreign media outside of Iran. And it would be nice if you also reflect on how the movement is perceived, imagined, or has been written about by non-Persian media outside of Iran. Go ahead, Nahi.
Thank you so much, Ali Jan. Thank you for organizing this. Thank you for having me on this panel with my esteemed colleagues. I also want to give a shout out to all the wonderful people in the audience. Thank you so much for being here. There's so many people from whom I've learned so much, and it's really an honor to have them here. And I'm hoping that we can have a conversation later on. Mehrzad and Fatemeh have already pointed to so much, and I will speak about media in a second, but I just want to sort of echo Fatemeh, I think, in her notion that this is an ongoing revolution or uprising. I fully believe that. I think that this is a very pregnant moment, and the way we know that is, these very young people stormed the streets, put their lives at risk, lost their lives, right? More than 60 children were killed, more than 500 people. Thousands are still in prisons. So they were really willing to pay the ultimate price. But what we now have seen since then, really the real work has now started, right? The statement that the civic organizations and labor unions have issued, the statement that came out on March 8th by a group of feminists in Iran, the statement of the Hambude Feministi, which Fatemeh is a part of. So these statements and charters and manifestos are now are being articulated and presented. And I think what we're seeing is the kind of real work behind the scenes happening now. And I think if nothing else, this movement really did have the kind of intersectional unity that we saw across minorities, political, even affiliations, religious backgrounds, all of that. And it really amounted to a sort of percolation, a sort of clarity that we didn't see, in the 2009 Green Movement. It was always ascribed to sort of middle-class politics and the uprisings leading up to this movement. What we've seen has been sort of more, issue-based politics of economy, this and that. And in this movement, we really see all of these movements coming together, and a sort of real clarity presented that, that Iranians would like to transcend the Islamic Republic and be done with a corrupt system that is coming short on all kinds of issues. And then, so I think there was a real paradigm shift, and we saw this in the chants of the protesters, which were more transgressive than anything we've ever seen. So a real sort of cultural, social, political paradigm shift, and if not a structural revolution, then certainly an internal revolution that was reflected in the art and music that we've seen, which is why the art and music has been so proliferate, because the imagination is there for that kind of transcending this current state. And then the other point is about the regime, which I think, yes, it has been destabilized. The regime has always gone for more marginalization, for more securitization after the 2009 Green Movement, securitization of online spaces, marginalization of reformist groups. And now it seems to be a little at a loss. And we see this in the kinds of, and completely withdrawing the morality police from the streets. And I know this was a contentious issue because, people came on and said, no, they haven't. And, they're trying to figure out, they're issuing different kinds of edicts and laws about what women, women and hijab, but they're reconsidering, and we're seeing the new agreements that was just announced today with Saudi, or some kind of meeting with Saudi Arabia, that ultimately I think this authoritarian regime has realized it needs to start creating greater bonds and unity with other authoritarian regimes in the region. As far as the media are concerned, I think the media are really taking their cues from us. And we need to be very mindful of what kind of image we put out there, what kind of expertise and reflection we're putting out there. Since the 2009 Green Movement, and increasingly sort of onward for the next sort of 5 or so years, the Islamic Republic has really not given any permits to foreign media to be based in Iran. And it kicked out its New York Times reporter about 4 years ago or so. So we really don't have too many people reporting for foreign media from within. The ones who are longtime reporters. They are Iranian. Their lives are there. They're very much at risk, and they are not at will to reflect and be critical to the extent that perhaps a foreign reporter with a visa for 2 weeks could do. So what we've seen in the foreign press, and Fatemeh can speak to this too, because she's been very active actually speaking to foreign language media, is that they're really trying to sort of figure out what's going on and relying on people like us. And I think there's a real historical responsibility on our shoulders, both as academics as well as people who are on the media, to how do we what kind of insights do we offer the media that then inform the world? I know we'll get to this because of a set of questions that I know we still want to get to, and I have a whole lot more to say about what the academy needs to do and where we've come short, but I'll keep those comments for later.
Thank you so much, Nahi John, and very, very thoughtful set of comments. At least I need to think a little more about particularly the sort of post. I mean, I'm not challenging your view that the movement is continuing, but certainly the sort of public face of the movement have stopped or is not as intense as it was. And it does to me, you are right, you just remind me that the government seems confused. The Islamic Republic have always this is not the ideal model for managing a country. They have always been very wishy-washy or not coherent in terms of their domestic or foreign policy, but they seem by far more confused now. And this is, of course, because of the movement. So that's very important in thinking about what will happen in the near future. And we will come back to the sort of main topic of today. But if you don't mind, I want to go back to Fatemeh and ask you this question. And I want to put it first in a rather general terms, but I'm hoping that for the rest of the conversation, we can be a little more specific. And here, the question is that, so all three of you, or if you include me, all four of us are Iranians living abroad. In this case, in our cases, we live in the US and we work in different university settings in the US. The question has already been raised outside of the academy, so I don't think I am the first person who is raising this issue. But from your point of view, Fatemeh, how do you think the receptions by, at this point, I'm just focused on Iranians outside of Iran who work in the academy, have been. As you know, many people have raised questions that people like us were very outspoken, very present, and very public, for instance, during the Green Movement. And now some folks have written and have spoken about the fact that the academy this time has been mostly either silence or have sort of supported or have made comments about the movement in a very sort of conditional form. How do you see this? What is your assessment of how the Iranian academic community, if we can call it, not that there is one community, have responded?
Yes, I mean, that's a really important question. And, I've been thinking about that over the past couple of days, sort of trying to gather my thoughts, because it's such an important question, but the answer is unfortunately not easy. I think the past 5-6 months, particularly for women academics, has been quite exhausting and draining for a few reasons. I think one is, suddenly we, and by we, I mean, women academics, we were sort of told or pushed into taking the center stage because this is all about women. But at the same time, throughout that process, a lot of us, those of us who were outspoken, unfortunately, were target of different smear online smear campaigns and, slandering comments. Most of them, unfortunately, gender-based. I mean, it's something expected. It's not something new in the social sort of virtual space. Both of us, me and Nahid, actually, we both experienced that over the past few months. And there is definitely this silence, I would say, and this kind of being passive and sort of taking a step back and sort of sitting and watching what's happening in the name of observing and learning at a point when I think every single individual who had the knowledge and experience of being part of the Iran's revolutionary uprising back in 1979, 2009, Green Movement, and all the different, and also before the revolution, your generation who actually belonged to a period of time when those political uprisings before the revolution were also extremely costly. And I think, and I'm afraid to say that, Alijan, it's a difficult, conversation and confirmation, but I personally felt quite lonely and isolated at some point, especially when there were moments that I thought that, making the public discourse in media complicated, to complicate this black and white sort of narrative that very soon, was leaning towards extremism on the other side, was, becoming a real danger to the nature of this movement. And I just felt, a lot of our colleagues, unfortunately, just decided to stay silent. And I really don't know why. And, this is a question I would like for the first time, and I really thank you for putting this panel together about university and activism, because I think a lot of our colleagues still look at activism and academia as a dichotomy. And they think that if they're producing knowledge, they're taking a theoretical distance from the ongoing events. And that is their justification in order to remain inactive in the course of the events. For people like me, for like Nahid, who we really struggled in academia as Iranian women, as women of color, to get to where we are. And we are still not tenured. And we had to go through this period and take this burden on our shoulders and constantly worry that what is going to happen to our tenure case? Because as you know very well, there are lots of divisions, ideological divisions between our colleagues in academia, particularly in US academia. Those who have been active trying to bring a nuanced approach on the table. But really what, the outcome has been, unfortunately, has been accusing a lot of those people who lived under the Islamic Republic after the revolution, accusing them or labeling them as militant academics who are trying to bring, the real sense of how life is like under the Islamic Republic. I speak, in the case of literature in particular, the censorship, the persecution, the chain murder of intellectuals, and imprisoning, sort of throwing poets in prison. The most, recent case, Baktash Abtin, who was a member of the, Iranian Writers Association, they literally put a chain around his neck as if this is medieval era and brought him to the court. What did our colleague do about this poet? Nothing. So I stopped there. Sorry, it's a very, very emotional topic for me. I just wanted to put it out there. I think it's important that we reflect on this collectively. Thank you.
Of course. And I hope you don't mind that the academic community is almost always critical of what is going on around them and in the world. And of course, for us as Iranians working in the academy, this movement, as both three of you basically indicated, if not the most important challenge to a very oppressive regime, is one of the most powerful one. And staying silent just brings, is mind-boggling. You know, we certainly need to have a conversation about this. I know I have seen you and other colleagues being attacked, but you have remained outspoken. So I want to make sure that that when I raise this question of our colleagues staying quiet or raising issues and concern about the movement, but not fully supporting it. Of course, I didn't mean to point to you, but Nahi-Jan, I want to continue this conversation by being a little more specific, and maybe Mehrzad can also chime in after you, because he was involved with this particular case that I want to mention, and this case brings both of the issues that Fatemeh talked about. One is what has been going on within the academy, and the other issue that is very concerning is how at the academy, or Iranians who work in the academy have been treated by Iranians outside of the academy. So early on, I believe this was in second week of September, some of our colleagues in the academy, I believe this was initiated by Nayireh Tauhidi, who was part of the first panel. They drafted a letter on behalf of Iranians in the academy, or maybe everyone in the academy in the US and Europe, and asked us to sign the letter. That is when this whole idea of how the academy, Iranians in the academy are responding to this movement began becoming an issue for me. And that was that after a few weeks, or maybe 2 weeks, only 50 of our colleagues signed this. I personally sent it to a number of colleagues who either did not respond or did not sign it. And I'm sure that many others did the same. And even after sometimes, say now, if you go and look, I believe 70 plus folks have signed this. And these kind of letters usually at least get 400 signatures on much smaller scale issues. Even as we were discussing, and there was a little email conversation about it, a couple of our colleagues denounced the letter and saying that this is a tame attempt in supporting the movement. But after the letter was public, I hope I can say this public because this is already almost in the public. This letter were condemned by many in social media. One of our colleagues the pressure was so bad that one of our colleagues denounced his own signature and asked those who organized the letter to remove his name. And Mehrzad, I'm not very good in social media, but I saw I don't know what kind of social media. Maybe it was Twitter, that some Iranians outside of Iran, but not in the academy, attacked us. I signed the letter, you signed the letter. I imagine most of us here signed the letter. And I saw you were one of those rare folks who responded, as opposed to our colleagues who more or less, oh, I didn't read it very well. I'm very sorry. I will ask folks to remove my name. So now, John, what does this represent? The fact that only there are thousands of I know that only in the US there are several thousands Iranians in the academy. There are hundreds who routinely sign these kind of letters. But with this movement, right, the way that both you, Nahid, and Fatemeh described this is an inspiring movement. This is a movement that is even goes beyond mere political matters. Its a slogan is feminist in one respect, is humanistic as you are describing it, but people in the academy who are basically very familiar and advocate for these kind of issues either refuse to sign it or are hesitant in supporting the movement.
Thank you, Alijan. I think it's a bit of a complicated issue, but I will say that, you know, I think we as academics and experts with all kinds of expertise, right? Economic, social, political, you know, women and gender studies, we have a unique historical responsibility to step in. And, you know, I reject the kind of notion of, you know, we are outside of Iran, they are inside of Iran, Iranians inside. No, the Iranians inside Iran don't have the kind of, you know, freedom and possibility to put forth a lot of the kinds of work that we could.
But Iranian academics in Iran, in a sort of wide range of them, spoke and have written and supported the movement, by the way.
Right, exactly. And they have. And what I'm exactly, and they have, and you know, at great risk to themselves. And we know some of them have already lost their positions at universities. The point I'm making is that I don't think it is for us. This is the moment for us to be silent, and because there are always these considerations about, oh, but you know, we are on the outside. We should be, yes, we should be certainly working with our colleagues inside Iran, and we should be taking our cues from what's happening in Iran. But at the same time, we should also be very cognizant that they have many, many more restrictions on them, on their lives, on their safety, security, that we don't have. And I think it will be a complete failure of imagination and really a failure on our historical responsibility at this moment not to put forth sort of the kind of expertise, for example, for us to, you know, for economists to come forward and tell us what is at stake for other countries if the Islamic Republic were to disappear. What are the kinds of forces that are really working against a dissolution or, you know, not aiding this movement to go forward? What about Iran's, you know, security system and the Sepah? Where are the experts there to just, you know, lay out some of their understanding of what it would take, in fact, for any kind of, let's say, defection to happen? I mean, there are all kinds of questions where we could put forth our expertise. And I think what we've seen that's been really helpful, for example, the, you know, Hamburger Feministi, where people from the, you know, academy outside of Iran and inside Iran have come together to finally write a Bill of Rights. And I know they've worked on it for many months, to write a Bill of Rights of the kinds of, you know, conditions that they would expect to see in the future. But I think it is upon us to really step in and do that kind of work. But I think the challenges have been this. People in the academia have been, you know, for a very long time and for many good reasons, have been very hesitant or uneasy with the kinds of people who ultimately sort of percolated to the top of the opposition movement here in the US, right? They have been hesitant, they have been uneasy because a lot of their politics, especially of, you know, some of their main figures have aligned with the sort of, you know, potentially foreign intervention kind of politics. And their politics very much comes from also on social media and online media. If we pay attention, it was a discourse that already existed on social media. This sort of alt-right overlapped very much with the Trump discourse. And that is the discourse that somehow became triumphant with the, with the uprising that happened in Iran, and managed to monopolize and really intimidate any other kind of thinking on what might, happen, any kind of thinking on Iran. And I think that's sort of been the issue where there's been a lot of, virtue signaling by celebrities and other people, other sort of, visible people in the diaspora. And there's been a lot of, people really taking the center stage who don't have that kind of political expertise really to lead this movement forward. And so I think it's there where this issue happened, where people were, distracted and diverted into this, in my opinion, somewhat pointless discourse of NIAC being a, pro-regime kind of a, that is not our concern right now. Sure, let's do that, but let's not make that the central aspect of our activism and our work here abroad, our leading, providing any kind of expertise forward. I think there's been a lot of diversion going on. I think a lot of Saudi and Israeli money is, poured into these kinds of discourses. We see this on Twitter, where there's a lot of inauthentic behavior, and there have been studies done on this, on the kind of, attacks and violence against women academics and women journalists. So unfortunately, a lot of the energy has been diverted toward that, rather than really just getting together and taking up that space and trying to put forth a kind of imagination fueled by expertise of what it would take, what we need to do, what structures do we need to, set in place in collaboration, certainly with our colleagues in Iran, with the ones who are able still to, contribute. We've seen great statements coming from, Nargis Mohammadi, Nahor Hidayat, Nasrin Sotoudeh. I mean, these are incredible leaders, and we saw the charter, that's been written from Iran, and Hamboud Feministis also has, sources and collaborators in Iran. So I think we need to sort of swerve away a little bit from the negative aspects of what's been happening, and really try to commit our energies to the potentials that exist and how we can contribute to that. I don't know if I was being a little too idealistic, but
okay. I actually want to come back to you, but I want to see if Mehrzad has any comments about the question I raised, and then I want to continue this. Mehrzad.
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Alijan. Yes. So I have a lot to say about this topic.
We lost you, Mehrzad. Mehrzad?
Yes.
Oh, okay. We lost you for a moment, or at least I lost you.
Oh, okay. So you have me now, right?
I have you now. Yes, I think
Okay.
you.
So I want to say the following. I think, if you want to put things in context, we have to acknowledge that many academics, of course, engaged in such activities as, signing petitions, appearing in media, teachings, writing and talking about this movement and the like. Yes, unfortunately, we have seen this, what I call false sense of radicalization in the diasporic community in particular, that has tried to intimidate and silence voices. Frankly, to add to what my two other colleagues mentioned, one of the other sources of frustration for me has been the following: that how many of our academics basically, when it came to social media or media outlets, allowed their emotions and daydreams to sort of overshadow their cool-headed scholarly judgment as academics, and engaged in this politics of sloganeering, in my view, talking about the revolution's success is inevitable, victory is within reach. We are there. In my view, and I'm sorry to use this word, but I think they became dream merchants, which did not really sit well with me. As somebody who from the very beginning, again, as a student of social science, who has been looking at these social movements, I was constantly worried. And to this day, I have this moral dilemma of, on the one hand, your heart and mind is with those, young folks in the streets that are challenging this brutal autocratic regime. And on the other hand, right, as an academic, I cannot close my eyes and to what were some of the shortcomings of these movements. So personally, I felt tormented, right, in the sense of, if I say something's publicly, how is it going to be construed? Am I pouring some cold water over people's, emotions and so forth? And at the end, Alijan, I decided that, my role as an academic obligates me to, yes, swim against the current and, point out to people that, let's stop this worshiping of the masses that became the norm. Because a few months before September 2022, right, it was us, the same type of academics, who were talking about all the shortcomings of the average citizen, right? How they are in favor of the death penalty, views on LGBT, issues and the like, how they go and, writing graffiti and tearing apart, bus chairs and things of that sort. And all of a sudden, all those subjects became taboo. You were called a regime apologist if you raised any of those type of questions. The whole issue of leadership that has come to the surface since that. Well, what happens if somebody like me feels that, the 8 or so individuals that have been put forward as self-declared leaders of this movement, frankly, are not qualified? They do not have the pedigree, they do not have the track record, etc., to be speaking of this movement. So I don't want to be all negative. I think, it's also fair to acknowledge that there are, at this moment, positive steps being undertaken too. In a couple of weeks, there is going to be a meeting at the Stanford University where, from what I have seen, the discussion are really going to be quite serious in terms of, planning ahead. Already, I am aware of academics, Iranian academics, for example, who have contacted law firms and, have drafted things such as transitional justice and what it should be. But I feel as academics, especially as the ones who have the luxury of being outside the country and therefore, some more room for free thinking, I think we need to fulfill our historical responsibilities, which is not only, putting on a hat as activists, drafting transition plans, providing advice to the leadership, formulating talking points, et cetera, talking to media and the like. But I think, also going back to our computers, thinking about the drawbacks, the shortcomings, of the anatomy of this, social movement, analyzing the slogans, analyzing the ethnic factor, what cities the protests are taking place, why is it, as I said, of short duration in the larger scheme of things, etc. I think these are the type of things I like to see us engage in. So my challenge, again, I end with this note. I think every single one of us faces this dilemma of, to what extent do I deliver hope? To what extent do I deliver an objective analysis, even when the message that I have to convey honestly is not that encouraging? There was a time when I was worried about the one-sided nature of Iranian intellectual landscape. I was thinking so much of Iranian intellectuals are to the left of the political spectrum. Nowadays, I think the pendulum has swung so strongly to the other side, right? We have an abundance of not only conservative, but I would say super, conservative, or if you wish, reactionary voices on the right that want to sort of silence all those voices of dissent. So the time is now, I think, for us to really wrestle with our conscience in terms of exactly, calibrating the type of message that we need to put out.
Okay. Thank you so much. it seems that you are frozen. It seems that your internet connection is not stable.
Sorry, yes, good.
Thank you so much. We are running a little short of time. This is the first time that we have many questions, but I have to say that the questions or maybe comments are so long that I cannot listen to our speakers and read these pages after pages. I will read them later. I'm sure that I would learn and enjoy reading them. But if any of our speakers have been able to read those, you can reflect on those questions. And Dylan, if you have had time to read them, maybe you can also share some of the comments. I have read some of them, and many of them are actually our friends here sharing their views. But I want to follow up a little on what you just said, Mehrzad, and then ask all three of you, since we may not have time to go in, one by one, and I don't think we have time for you to spend more than a minute or two on this. To just come back and try to be more both reflective and helpful is that we Iranians who are in the academy, at least in the US and in Europe, we are also a tremendous amount of resource for this or any kind of democratic movement in Iran. I don't think that anybody can deny this. It's not just, we are not just in the individuals scattered all over, some areas in Europe and in the US. We are a community. We do have links and connections, and many of us are also involved and even important figures in various academic communities. So one issue is, regardless of some of the problems that we discussed, and hopefully we have time to further discuss them in the future, that how can we organize, how can we imagine ourselves and the resources we have as in a more institutional way, helpful to the movement in Iran? Because many of these distractions and experiences we have had to do with politics outside of Iran, right? Even your last comment, Mehrzad, these ultra right-wing folks, self-declared leaders of these movements, they are based here and not in Iran. In our first set of conversation we had with Aghay Kardwani and Khanem Tawhidi, the idea was raised that perhaps we can create, or we can at least think of, a think tank or a اتاق فکر و اندیشه. And I say this because even agreeing with every comment that all of you three of you made, and the distractions and problems and issues, is not that if Iranian academics have written in the past 6 months so many documents, essays and articles and reports about this movement. There have been very few, but we have not really been focused from even academic perspectives on what the meaning of this movement is, how this movement can further itself or reflect on it. So I want to ask all three of you, you can start, Mehrzad, if you want, but you don't have to. Any of you who have any thoughts on what do you think is the best way to move on? Because regardless of our view, whether this is a revolution or a movement or whatever it is, it seems that we all agree that further changes, further movements, further protests are coming in, and problems are there. We cannot say that everybody should stop misbehaving and then we'll enter. We need to, it is time for us to have an impact. How do you think the Iranians in the academy can have a better impact as a community?
So if I could be quick on that, Alion. So I 2 months after this uprising started, this was indeed, an idea that I put forward, the need for a think tank. Because as you said, something is absolutely certain, right? This is not going to be the last crisis of the Islamic Republic. There are going to be boundless other crises coming up. And I think very soon, yeah. I mean, the next one can be over water issues, right? The economic conditions, whatever the case might be. The question for the academic community, I think, is really, again, for us to see how we can be that thinking arm, right, of those people in the streets of Iran, right? Understanding, if we talk about our civil society being fragile, if we are talking about, the problem of, durability of these type of movements. So what can we do? Look, the Islamic Republic with its horrendous human rights record, right, doesn't need us to go out there exposing it for its, reactionary way. That used to be done toward the Shah before the revolution. Everybody knows this is a reactionary regime, right? So that's not, I think, part of our obligation. Our obligation is to be that, think tank, to provide that food for thought, right? For what the future should be. And absolutely the folks on the ground, right? I mean, frankly, this movement is creating so many fascinating features, right, that we need to think about. I mean, I just give you one about which I wrote, right, about the Sunnis. I mean, we talk about separation of church and state, right, as one of the pillars of what a democratic future Iran should be. And then I look at a place like Zahedan, right, where you have a religious cleric, right, week after week, every Friday coming out and in his sermons in the strongest possible terms, denouncing the state and what it's doing, defending the rights of women, children, et cetera, et cetera. I think these are the type of issues that need to force us, right, to think more seriously, go beyond the slogans and say what exactly is going to be the nature of, a state and religion in hopefully a post-Islamic Republic type of state.
Thank you so much. Fatemeh Jan, do you have any comment?
I have many comments, but we are running out of time. I just wanted to mention something. I think what's really important here, I can again see this sort of traces of this perhaps lack of understanding that why women whose bodies have been on the front line in this movement, perhaps their understanding of scholar activism is quite different at this point. I think for us, being an activist really starts since we are like 9 years old, because we have to resist and fight against different layers of patriarchy and misogyny in our personal life and later on in our professional life too. And so that scholar activism that comes much later in our careers is really just sort of the continuity of the same same line that already existed in our lives. And I think in the past few months as well, what is being described here as emotional, I think I take issue with that, Mehrzad, because I think emotions are extremely important. An important part of an affect is an important part of meaning making in the political action and political resistance. We can't really just make a binary between emotion and sort of intelligence, or emotion and intellect, and sort of being reasonable and rational versus being emotional. I don't believe in that, and I really think if we buy that binary, then we have to condemn all of these women and girls who came to the streets and made bonfires with their veils, because that could be also, described as an act of, being sort of taken away with emotions and rage. So, and I think, the topic of this this panel, which is academia and activism, is really just a topic that invites all of us to learn and to reflect on how we are merging the emotions and the affect with meaning making and content making. I agree that this is our responsibility to make content, but I also believe that producing content is impossible and in a way impractical if we are not in touch with the grassroots movement, with those on the ground who are doing the real work inside the country. And thanks to Nahid, she mentioned the feminist collective of Iran. There has been also feminists for Jina, and women are doing the real work in this movement. They are putting out content that comes out of this collective international, transnational network of thinking together, acting together, and producing the content for the future of Iran. The reason that I call this revolution is because for these feminist collectives, the imagination of an Iran where the rights of women and marginalized bodies will be respected is very much possible. And we cannot underestimate that power of imagination. And in order for us as academics to make sense and to be able to have an impact on the ongoing events, I think we really have to just rethink our relationship with those grassroots forces. We cannot produce content. We can write thousands of op-eds in English and Persian and have zero effect on what is happening on the ground. And I also think yes, we are highly critical of these so-called far-right, forces who are, taking the lead. But we can't just be in a position of criticizing them. What are we doing? What is our alternative? We also need to put out an alternative that is as active and as, influential. To some extent, I believe we can, but unfortunately, because of this situation with the media distorting and also manipulating the events and sort of highlighting what they think should be highlighted. And I think this episode of the resistance in Iran is pretty unique in ways in which the Persian-speaking media outside Iran is actually manipulating the discourse of this revolution with the help of other countries, such as Saudi Arabia. And I think, that's something that we need to think about and problematize as well. Thank you, Alijan.
Great. Thank you, Fatemeh Jan. My thinking is actually to go beyond this issue of being critical assessment versus emotional support. We don't have to reinvent the wheel each time, right? In any social movement, that those who support a movement always support a movement, but they have criticism or they may have concern, right? So you show your support through solidarity, right? Hambastagi. It is very important to also show this through emotions. This was certainly my first reaction for the first few weeks. I didn't want to even reflect critically. It was people were dying, being attacked all the time. And the first, at least in my case, my first response is to show solidarity, to show sisterhood and brotherhood. But this doesn't exclude the fact that you want to reflect and you want to make comments about where the movement is going. So in that context, and since we are really out of time, there are several questions about, and they the audience want our speakers to respond to the fact that this seems to be a movement that lacks leadership. Nahid John, is this at all important or not? If it is important, what is your assessment of such an important movement with no leadership, which means that, as Mehrzad and Fatemeh mentioned, everybody running for calling themselves leaders of the revolution. What does it mean when a revolution doesn't have a leadership in Iran, Nahid? And then both.
Sure, thank you. So we heard at the beginning, we heard this sentiment a lot, that it was important for this to be a leaderless movement, that it was smart because it was leaderless. And, you know, initially, I very much agree that for the first few months, because it was, and I'm sorry, there's construction going on. Let me know if the noise becomes unbearable. But because it was a leaderless movement, this movement really, at least on the streets, could adapt to the forms of repression that was happening on the streets. But I think, you know, at this point, we do need leaders. And I know there's a committee on the outside and there have been manifestos, you know, issued. But I think I would really like to see both from within academia and other kinds of fields of expertise in the US as sort of intergenerational, you know, collective that comes together to put their word, you know, and work forward in the different aspects of both the Islamic Republic and what it takes to overcome. Because, you know, we have some of these, you know, some of our experts like yourself have actually experienced the 1979 revolution, where, you know, we did not have any plans or, you know, real clear ideas about the path forward until the revolution actually succeeded and Khomeini, you know, landed, and because of his charisma, ultimately sort of, you know, took over the reins of what ensued afterwards. So I really would like to see an intergenerational sort of coalition of people. If we can, you know, like my colleagues have said, we have to collaborate with people inside Iran. But you know, I don't think that negates our role here, not least because we have been so many different waves of emigration from Iran that many of us have very close links and relations, and some of us very recent understanding of processes in Iran. And the last thing I want to say is that, you know, people in Iran did muster the imagination, and that's why this notion of affect and emotion and the artistry that has been referred to both by Mehrzad and Fatemeh is so important. And I think it is, you know, I feel like we are in a very precarious moment where that kind of imagination could sag, and that kind of, you know, inspiration to create that other new world. We have so many strong forces against us, you know, all kinds of very strong authoritarian states that support the Islamic Republic, which is an authoritarian state. So, you know, the odds are stacked against us, but I think we should never underestimate what can happen when a people imagines a new future, as it did 44 years ago. So anyway, I'm hoping that we can have that kind of collective. I'm sorry for the noise, I'm going to mute.
Thank you so much. They were on time.
Alijan, can I very quickly say two words? I know I mentioned the revolutionary movement. I just wanted to say, I know that the importance of the slogans and analyzing the slogans also came up. So I just wanted to mention that we do need to listen to the people in the streets of Iran and what do they call it, and you know, then try to reflect on that. On October 12th, 2022, students of Az-Zahra University, the female-only university, came out and said, "Behesh nagid e'teraz, esmesh shode enqilab." Don't call it protests anymore. This is the revolution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Mehrzad John, do you have any last comments before our time expires?
No, in the interest of time, let me stop. Yeah, I have a lot of rejoinders, but I think maybe another time.
Thank you so much. My apologies, the questions are so long and I cannot even see them.
Alijan, sorry, may I just plug something, if it's okay? I hope you don't mind. Just because Fatemeh John brought up the issue of slogans. We started a podcast called Women, Life, Freedom, All In on Iran at the University of Texas at Austin. And one of the episodes is, in fact, with with Fatemeh about the slogans and poetry of the revolution. Thank you. Just wanted to plug the podcast.
Great. I hope we can find it and send the information to everyone. I was able to read one comment that was short, and this was that this was a wonderful conversation, and our friend in the audience asked us to bring all of you back for another conversation. I think it's a wonderful idea, and we will try to do so, and to have all three of our speakers. Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. I particularly say this because some of us in the academy have been accused of having ideas that are old and stale, and all the comments that three of you made showed how fresh you are, both in your analytical abilities, in engaging into conversation, and in showing your solidarity and your commitment to this particular one, but generally speaking, democratic movement and movement for justice in Iran. Thank you so much, Mehrzad Jan and Fatemeh and Nahid. We very much hope to bring you back for another conversation. This was wonderful, and many thanks to all of you in the audience. I am very sorry we did not have time to specifically read your questions, but I will read them later, and we'll try to see if we can organize at least one more event this semester, but certainly if not, in the fall. Have a good afternoon, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you, Alijan.
Thank you, Alijan.
Thank you,
Mehrzad
Mehrzad and
Jan.
Fatemeh Jan.
Thank you, Nate. This was wonderful.
See you
Thank
soon.
you. Bye.